Hello, and this is the third Sunday after Easter, and welcome. I'm glad you all are able to be there. I've noticed on uh, YouTube that several people have been watching the Sunday school videos, and I've been glad that you guys have been keeping up with Pastor Kim's um, services as well. That he's been keeping on doing that and supporting the church. So that's very cool that you guys have been doing that and showing that support. That's so important, not only for the life of the church, but also for our spiritual life together. That we still have that shared experience um, in a way that we couldn't have otherwise. So that's neat that we're able to continue that connection there through that, so that church really can continue. And here, hopefully, in a little while, we can go back to church without having to endanger ourselves um, any more than we already do. And we thank you for that continued connection, and that God's working through us still in this separated way, that we're able to continue to do church. So that's pretty cool. Today's reading is super familiar to y'all, so I'm going to read it, and and we'll just go from there. It's Luke 24, starting with verse 13, which in my Bible is at the top of the page. So there it is. It's page 171 if you have the Gideon Bible from 1968, like this one is. So there it is. And behold, two of them went the same day to a village called Emmaus. I just gave it away, didn't I? But this is right in the, after the resurrection. They found out about the resurrection, so they know about it. And just like last week when we talked about the fact that the disciples knew, I mean, Jesus had talked about it, but they'd also been told. They had been given the information that Jesus had risen. So they at least had heard it. Now, obviously, it's insanely big news to actually hear that. So, and I've got to say that if somebody came along and said, that somebody I know had been dead, wasn't, regardless of what they had said before, I would want to see that myself. I would have that a bit of skepticism. Oh yeah, he's right. Okay, sure, because it's out of our range of knowledge. It just doesn't happen. Now, of course the disciples had seen Lazarus come out, and that's one thing. I think this is even in a different category than that from that standpoint. But here it is. They have found out Jesus was alive, and now they've decided to head back home, get on the road to Emmaus, and go on back. And so now they've left. We don't know who they are yet. It's just two of them, two of the disciples, two of the people who had been present and knew that had received the information. And it was about 60 furlongs, so that's like 8 miles. And I was just reading an article a couple months ago in the Biblical Archaeological Review about the fact that they're still looking for the city of Emmaus, that they still haven't found it. There's some contenders that are far enough away, but there's there wasn't a continuous town that said, oh yeah, like Jerusalem. It's been Jerusalem. It's always been, and nobody's saying, oh no, it's over there. Whereas some of the smaller towns are, nobody kept track of it. So that, especially when everything, fell apart after 70 AD, a lot of these towns that had that continuity for however long lost it. And Emmaus was one of them. So today, if you wanted to walk on the road to Emmaus, there are 3 different towns that will tell you, yeah, I'm Emmaus, right over here. But the archaeologists don't really know. They haven't They haven't been able to pinpoint it. But these guys are on the road to Emmaus, and they talk together about all the things that had happened. Jesus' crucifixion and the fact that they had heard him rising from the dead. And it came to pass that while they communed together and reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. And they don't even know, where Jesus come from, how this happened. They don't know, which goes along with it. In any trip, especially when I've been on hiking trips like that, at the end of the time, I couldn't tell you everybody that I had walked next to during that, because you tend to, especially in a walking culture like that was, there would have been a few horses and donkeys on the road. Other than that, pretty much you're walking. And that was the case with them, that if you were on the road back then, you were walking. And so Jesus came up, but their eyes were holden, where their eyes were clouded, that they should not know him. And he said to them, "What manner of communication are these that you have come to walk with one another as you walk, and are sad?" And one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered and said unto him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem that hasn't known the things that have come to pass in these days?" And he said and he said, "Well, what things are you talking about?" And they said, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word, and how the chief priests and all the rulers delivered him to be condemned to death, and they had him crucified. But we trusted that it had been he which would have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the third day since these things were done. And yea, certain women of our company made us astonished, which were early at the sepulchre. And they found not his body. And they came, saying that they had seen a vision of angels. And they said which he was alive. And certain of them which were with us went to the sepulchre, and found it even so as the women have said, but they didn't see Jesus. And then they said, "Oh, fools." And then Jesus said, listen to the whole thing. And you heard the disciples, Cleopas and whoever the other one was, say the whole thing. That the women said he was alive, he'd been crucified, Jesus was mighty in word and deed, and now here he is. He's dead. And he was alive, and we don't even know what to do with this information, so we're heading home. And they just shared this with somebody who was a stranger. Now, the fact that they're on the road to Emmaus and still share this information, and notice that they don't do it in a dispassionate way. Here's the stranger, as far as they're concerned, that comes up to them, and then they're just spilling the whole beans about who Jesus was, and obviously their connection with him and their belief that he was God's person to bring in the kingdom. They believed it all, and had that connection with Jesus, and they're sharing it with this complete stranger. Now, contrast that with the people who were in the upper room that were scared to death even after they heard about Jesus being raised from the dead. Those people were scared, and they'd locked the door. Jesus had to come in, through the locked door. These guys are going, and they're hightailing it, of course, but they're still admitting to their connection with who Jesus is. They're still making it known that Jesus is their guy. They believe in him, even if they couldn't quite wrap their heads around the idea of a resurrection. And then Jesus said to them, "O fools and slow of heart to believe that what the prophets have spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." Now, they still don't know it's Jesus. They're only getting the lessons about who Jesus is and his connection to the fulfillment of the Old Testament. But they haven't gotten the whole word yet. Here's who it is. And of course, That doesn't happen for another couple minutes. And as they came near the village, because, 8 miles, even if you walk at a normal pace, which for me is like 2.5 miles an hour, when I have a backpack, it's like 1.5. But general pace is like, 2.5 miles an hour or thereabouts. Maybe 3 if I really have the, pep in the step there, but can't keep that up forever. If you're just out on a walk. So if you figure 2.5 miles an hour, that's, right at 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours it took them to make the walk to home. And so they were walking for part of that time. So it was probably, an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours if Jesus was with them in a way that they knew it and that they were talking with Jesus. And so now they get to Emmaus, they get to the village where they were going, and he made as though he would have gone further. Oh, I got to keep going. And they constrained him, saying, oh, stay with us, because it's toward evening. So they only got started at, in late afternoon, and now it's getting evening. And generally speaking, you didn't want to be on the road at night. Remember, no street lights. And if there was no moon, you were on your own. They did have the little, lamp that you could carry on a stick that you could hold down. And I've mentioned that that's where thou art a lamp unto my feet, because you held it down at your feet, because that's where you needed to see where the next rock was and where the edge of the road was. So when you were walking, if you had to walk at night, if you had to go anywhere at night, you went with a lamp, because their technology did not have very bright portable lamps. If you had a lamp that you could see by, it was big because it was giving out a big flame. If you had a lamp that you could carry, chances are it was pretty small, because candle technology was pretty much related to natural waxes like beeswax or stuff like that, which you didn't have a whole lot of. So generally speaking, it was oil. Give me oil for my lamp, and that's what they used, which meant that you had to have a vessel to hold it in and a wick, and then that was just giving out smaller than a candle lamp, candle light that you would have, and so you'd have to hold it down. So generally speaking, you didn't go out at night. And so when they said to Jesus, well, it's getting dark, you don't want to keep going, they were being practical, but you also saw the compulsion there to continue to fellowship with Jesus in a way that they hadn't, that they had been doing. And you got to figure in a way that they had missed, that they had had that relationship with Jesus being his disciple, that they had known the ability to have access to Jesus' wisdom in that way, that was pretty incredible to them. And now they have it again, only they don't know they have it again, but they have it again. And so they're saying, please stay, keep, don't go on. And it came to pass that when they sat down to dinner, that he broke bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. And this is verse 31, their eyes were open. They knew him. And then he was gone. And everything I just said about the danger of walking at night, they forgot. Because they zipped on back to Jerusalem as quick as they could. And they said to one another, did our hearts not burn within us while he talked with us on the way, and while he opened to us the scriptures? And they rose up that same hour, went back, found the 11 gathered together, and them that were with him. And of course we knew it was a bigger crowd than just the 11, because there were those two that had been part of it. So we saw another sort of clue as to the larger circle of Jesus' disciples, and saying, the Lord is indeed, and then the people told them, the Lord is risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. And they told him the things that were done on the way, and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread, and the fact that they had that connection with him, and that they recognized that when their eyes were closed and they couldn't make the leap to, yes, the Lord is risen indeed, that was part of their eyes being closed. That when Jesus broke the bread, when that familiar thing happened, when that communion happened, the reason we call it communion is that we commune with each other, but we also commune with the Lord, and that makes a difference in our ability to perceive His risenness. So that when they said, "The Lord is risen indeed," that was, He appeared to Simon, and they all believed it in a way that they hadn't before, and now these two disciples that were on the road to Emmaus had the light shine on them. And just like back before Christmas, or right at Christmas time, we talked about Epiphany, and that was God's light shining on people to have them understand in a new way, in a different way, something that they had been grappling with. And the word epiphany as a literature device is just anything that you had been grappling with. But from the standpoint of God coming into the world, these two on the road to Emmaus had their epiphany about the fact that Jesus had appeared to them as they sat together at the table, and they recognized it. And then they recognized their excitement at hearing Jesus teaching. And they realized that they needed to go share that, even though there was some danger in doing it now, in going out at night back to Jerusalem. And they were willing to take the risk that the bandits were on the road, that stuff was going to happen, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that they had encountered the risen Christ, and they had encountered Him in a way that made it super real to them, and they couldn't keep quiet about it. Now, they had already, as I pointed out, they had already been honest in their understanding of who Jesus was, because when the stranger came up, who we only later on found out was Jesus, they were sharing their deepest thoughts about Him. They were opening up about who Jesus was, so they were already inclined to share the reality of Jesus with people, even though they didn't understand the whole package yet. And now when Jesus comes, they're busting out. They are sharing with the disciples the reality of who they know Jesus to be. And of course they receive the confirmation that that's exactly what's going on. And I've got to say, for me, I recognize that there's both of that. That I recognize the reality of Jesus in my life when I am in community, and when I'm able to share that reality as well. And that it's the sharing that makes me ready. It's that openness that makes me ready to understand the risen Christ in a way that I hadn't before. And it's the, in that sense, when the Bible says, understood Him in the breaking of bread, it was more than just the familiarity of what Jesus had done 1,000 times while they were disciples. It was the fact that they were having that connection with Jesus in that mealtime way that they didn't have any other way. And that made a difference to who they understood Jesus to be. It made a difference in their ability to perceive the risen Lord. And it made a difference in their ability to now act on that information in a real way, in a way that came from the heart, because they had truly experienced it. Because remember, they knew it here the whole time. They had an intellectual understanding of people that had told them that. So it obviously needed to be more than just, I understand what you're saying. Which is why many people have pointed out that generally speaking, people don't come to Jesus because you've argued them into the kingdom, because you've browbeat them and you had the better argument. People come into the kingdom because they were loved into the kingdom. They were able to perceive God's love in the breaking of the bread. And when they did that, they were able to make those connections too. I was just reading a story about a woman who was adopted into a family of unbelievers, and yet she was drawn to church, and as a young elementary school kid, got permission from her parents. Of course, this was back in the 70s when we were let to just wander as we would. But she went to church and sat in the back pew and was befriended by an older gentleman who told her what was going on in church, and acted like a godfather to her and led her through what it meant to be a believer. And now she's an Episcopal priest because somebody reached out to her. Somebody loved her into the kingdom and reached out that hand of fellowship. And when they had that connection with Jesus, that made the bridge. And that's how it'll work for us. That's how it works for us. As we maintain that connection with each other, we maintain the reality of the risen Christ in our hearts. And as we maintain those connections of love with other people who haven't heard about Jesus yet, or haven't seen love in action in a way that really made a difference to them, that's what's gonna make the difference for them. And of course, when you read the Bible and the fact that Jesus had been there and broke the bread, they were already believers, just they hadn't believed yet. They were that close. And the fact is that there will be people that we reach out to that haven't believed yet, and what may never in our presence. But that doesn't stop the compulsion of love from our side to continue to break bread with one another, so that we have the fellowship, and with people who don't know, so that they can enter the fellowship, so that they will commune as well. And in that sense, we're part of that same journey to Emmaus. We're part of that same connection that Jesus had, that we can too. Well, it's a cool thing that you and I can be connected in that way. I look forward to the day when we can have communion together, where we can break bread together, and that would be wonderful. And I'm looking forward to it soon. But until then, I want to commend to you the continued prayers that you all have been having for each other, and I thank you for praying for me. I appreciate that. I've got to say, I really appreciate the fact that Barbara's been working hard to help keep me socially isolated, since I'm a bit compromised, and that my daughter Liz has really been helping us immeasurably in shopping for us and doing that. So it's very cool that we have those resources. But I miss y'all, and I will be so glad to see you. And thank you all, and have a good week. Amen.